Ladies and gentlemen, here we go. It's that time of year again. It's draft season. Everybody's getting pumped up. And this is Offside's big draft show with our buddy Mark Seidel. He jumps on during the World Juniors and, of course, when the draft gets near. And you know what it is for us. We are proudly brought to you by Boxing Rock Brewing Co.'s Puck Off Lagerdale, the absolute big beer for the big game. There's no big game, so why not the big draft? Mark, how have you been, my friend? It's been a little while.
Good, boys. Been a while since the World Juniors for sure. That ended quickly, and yeah, it's been busy. Certainly been busy, but looking forward to next week for sure.
Oh, definitely. And my co-host, as always, is Mr. D4 Dylan Fournier. Dylan, how's the day treating you, buddy?
It's solid.
There we go. All right. So, Mark, I want to ask you right on the gate here. We do have the World Juniors coming up in August. I want to ask you an honest question. Some of these players will now be NHL property. Do you see some of them maybe not suiting up again for the World Juniors this summer because the NHL teams may want to get a look at them at camp, don't want them banged up? Or will some teams say, hey, this may be an easy tune-up for them to get ready for camp?
Yeah, I think the latter is probably the way it's going to go, guys. There might be the odd one that, I don't think an NHL team is really going to say to a guy, hey, we don't want you to play in this. I mean, there's always a risk of injury for sure, but I mean, that can happen anytime. It gives you a chance to play best on best and against their peers. As you say, get them ready for camp for sure. And it's also, I guess Shane Wright is right now the betting favorite to be the number one pick, but it's not like, I don't know, it's not like a guy that you guarantee is going to play in the NHL. I mean, Shane Wright could go first overall and still go back to Kingston next year. So I don't see an NHL team saying no to a guy. Maybe it happens, but I'll be surprised. I think it'll be very similar to the team that you saw in December out in Edmonton.
No, that's great to hear because I know a lot of fans want to watch this tournament and finish it up. Obviously, everybody's got eyes on guys like Shane Wright, and you want to look at guys, at least on the Leafs side of things, like Toppy Nemela, Ronnie Hervenin, who are back on the squad again. I asked that question just because everybody wants to get excited. In the summertime, we know the dog days of summer are August. There's not a lot of news trickling in. You're waiting for camp. You're salivating for it. So now you got the World Juniors on deck there. I think that really gives you a nice segue going into the season. For you, look at this draft here. Top three seems to be more flexible, more up and down than I've seen in a long while with Cooley, Slafkowski, and, of course, Shane Wright. Who do you foresee going number one? A lot of people saying Shane Wright, but I'm looking today, and the Bob father himself has Slafkowski going number one, setting the internet on fire. I guess when you're sipping Bobby margaritas, you can do what you want. But I'm wondering for you, is Shane Wright still the betting favorite here?
Well, this is the way I look at it, guys. We've got Slafkowski 1 on our board. Now, we've also got Cooley 2 on our board and Wright 3. So what it's going to come down to from Montreal is, do you want to take the safe way out? And it's not always safe as death. Shane Wright, at worst, is going to be a second-line center in the National Hockey League. Obviously, his ceiling is a first-line centerman. There's very, very low risk of Shane Wright busting. I just don't see it in any way. He's so smart. He's got so many parts to his game that are great. Now, is he a game breaker or that kind of player? No. But his bust factor is very, very low. Slafkowski, on the other hand, has way more upside. Why compare him to Jaromir Jagr? But there's a bust factor with him. There were times this year when he played in Finland that he was very, very, very quiet. And I think that scares teams a little bit too. So if you're Montreal, do you swing for the fences and take Slafkowski? Do you kind of go in the middle and say, hey, maybe we go Cooley or trade down? I think if they're thinking Cooley, they'll trade down a bit, at least one spot or two. Or do you go Wright, who everybody's talked about for 3 years, is going to play, what he's going to be, and know that you're not going to bust. I mean, if you have the first overall pick and you take Slafkowski and he turns into a bust, that hurts your franchise for a long time. Shane Wright's never going to hurt your franchise. So if I was a betting man right now, I would bet they're going to go Shane Wright. But again, personally, I hope they go Slafkowski. So I'd like to see them swing for the fences. But, those are the decisions that they're going to have to make. And that's really what it comes down to. Do you want to go for the home run or do you want to hit the safe double?
All right. The question I'll ask then, if Montreal is going to move that first overall pick, how far do you see them moving down? Obviously, you talk about Slafkowski. Do you move to 2? Do you move to 3 if you know that other teams have their eyes on Cooley? how far would you say they'd move? Or if they're swinging for the fences and Kent Hughes really wants to expedite this rebuild, a la the New York Rangers bringing in Panarin, do they do that to bring in a huge piece that could really jumpstart their program and add it to the mix? And I'm looking at teams that maybe need a Shane Wright or a Slafkowski more than Montreal does. If you go back to Carey Price and net, and that guy's going to be your anchor, and you have Nick Suzuki and other things, do you go and get a player who's already NHL ready with that pick? Which way would you say the Montreal Canadiens would lean more?
Well, in almost any other year, I guess I should rephrase that. If the draft was in almost or any other city, I think there'd be a very good chance of that. The draft, obviously, of course, is in Montreal. They've got the first pick. Could they move down? Sure. I mean, you're going to take a little wind out of the sails, but fans will be happy if they move down. I don't see them going anywhere further than 4. Okay. If they go to 4, I would expect that Simon Nemec is the guy. They want to get a D. I think he's the best D in the draft, and personally, I don't think it's very close. So they can go down as far as 4. Jersey's made it well known they're willing to move that pick. Maybe you do a 3-way where they drop to 2, somebody jumps to 1, and Jersey goes and gets a more ready player like you're talking about. But because it's in Montreal, just the feel of it all. Now, listen, Kent Hughes is not afraid. He is not scared of anything. And if he determines that, we have a building full of fans and we still think this is the best move, that's what we're doing. I have a ton of respect for him. He's done a great job, as an agent, a real stand-up guy and not afraid. So I don't think he's going to be bullied into it. But at the end of the day, it's still entertainment. It's still business. And they know that they got the first pick. They can probably move down a couple spots, but I don't see it any further than that.
All right. Dylan, you got anything to add about the Montreal situation here?
Nothing about the Montreal situation, but we were talking about the top 3. I'm just curious, who finishes out the top 10 for you?
Well, for us, we've got Simon Nemec at 4, who I think is the best defenseman in the draft, and there's a bit of a gap there. Matthew Savoy, a little undersized, but I love him. I've loved him for years. What he did in Winnipeg was special. Joachim Kemmel, who had good parts of his year, bad parts of his year, but very dynamic winger. Frankie Nazar is probably, we probably have him higher than maybe even his parents would have him. Another guy that I think has got Clayton Keller written all over him. Small, undersized guy, good to put up a lot of points in this league. Cutter Gauthier is kind of the opposite. Same program, the U.S. program. Big power forward, goal scorer. He's one of those guys that, again, what he's going to be. His ceiling, I don't know if it's as high as some of these other guys, but he's going to be a big, strong power forward and score goals. Kevin Korchinski, the defenseman from Seattle, who, quite frankly, guys, 2 months, maybe 3 months ago, we had him, I think, outside the first round. I think we had him at 34, 35.
That's where I've seen him. I've seen him as high as 20 is where I've seen him so far.
Yeah, we got him at 9. The way this kid played in the playoffs, it was phenomenal. I mean, it was an eye-opener, and the more we watched in the playoffs, the more we went, man, are we wrong here? And he just kept marching up. I mean, I don't want to say he's Moritz Seider, but that's the kind of path that Moritz Seider had that year. Of course, Moritz Seider played in the World Championships and really was unbelievable for Germany in that tournament. Korchinski didn't. He played in the WHL playoffs, but this kid is the real deal. I mean, he's offense, he's big. And lastly, we got David Jiricek at 10. Again, we're a little lower on David Jiricek than I think a lot of people. I don't even know where Bob had him today. Quite frankly, I haven't even had time to even look at his list yet. But Jiricek is a guy, I just don't think he's ever going to create a ton of offense. I think he's a big, strong, safe, stay-at-home D. Some people think he's got some offense. I don't think it translates to the NHL. So those are our top 10 in that order.
Yeah, you talk about Gauthier. Actually, I've seen him high as 4. So you talk about players that maybe their father or mom having them high. I've seen him pretty high there. You like Nemec?
His dad's a Sudbury guy. I got to be honest. In Ontario, I live in Sudbury. He's a Sudbury guy. His dad was a goalie, played pro. So I got a soft spot in my heart for Cutter. But 4 to me is pretty high for him. But again, it takes one team, right?
Oh, it definitely does. So we broke down the top 10 there. I want to ask you, you just talked about a couple of players that were on the rise. For you, who's the guy right now that's had the biggest rise in your eyes, that his stock just went up? We talked about one, but is there somebody else that maybe we're not focusing on that has really taken steps, even just to get into the first round or maybe get a mention of the first round, that you're like, hey, this person took those steps?
Well, I mentioned Frankie Nazar, or sorry, I mentioned Korchinski. Frankie Nazar is a guy for us. Again, it's not that he really came on. I think all year, kind of people were concerned a little bit about his size and stuff. I just think he's a special player. Um, as the season went on, I mean, no, there's not a lot of guys that kind of jumped up late. That it's our top 25 for the most part has been pretty standard. Obviously guys have moved around and stuff. Maybe Jagger Furcus. For the average fan, really, as a kid that came to the CHL top prospect game, wasn't really well known, undersized, was phenomenal in that game, and really was very, very good the rest of the year. So maybe he's a guy that, and we'll talk about him later with one of the potential picks for the Leafs. But he's a guy maybe that's come up, and again, it's hard. Fans are one way. Scouts, we've seen these guys all year, and so it's not really like they're really climbing for us. But some fans haven't heard of some of these guys, and all of a sudden they're 17 or something, and they'll be surprised by it. So Korchinski, Nazar, and probably Furcus would be the three.
Well, that's the fun thing about the draft before we talk about those three guys. Everybody right now is a draft expert, right? Oh, yeah, they hear a name and they're like, yeah, no, that guy right there, huge. I don't pretend to be. I get people like yourself to talk to and fill me in on where I'm missing. And you were huge on talking to me into about Robertson a couple of years ago, Matthew Nyes. These guys, you said, don't worry, these are the guys that you want to see. And you told me how high you guys had them ranked. So, and you see it, especially now with Matthew Nyes. Is there a guy for you guys right now that, again, we talk about sliding scale, you guys see the guys all year, but is there someone whose stock really has taken a hit? You look at Lambert, who is at one point a guy that may challenge for the number one spot. Some people have him, as high as 25, 15. What's a guy like him? Is he the biggest drop in this draft, or there's somebody else?
Yeah, I think he would be. I don't want to get off topic, but I just have a comment about what you said. I started doing this in 1991, and I'm pretty sure both you guys were not even around at that point in time.
Oh, 86 baby here. 86.
Come on. Well, there you go.
I was here.
You hadn't started school yet, but anyhow, it's when I started, there were basically three of us, three different companies. And with the advent of Twitter and social media, I mean, now, as you say, there's 100,000, and it's I don't want to say it's a pet peeve of mine, but it burns my ass. I mean, everybody puts out these rankings. All they do is just shift the names here, there, and this and that, and they just try. My question always for these guys, and I'm sorry to go on a rant here, but how many of these guys have you seen live? That's the question I have for some of these people. And I got no problem with young people trying to get in the game and putting their name out there. I always have respect for people who put their name to things, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's you know the guys you see in the rink, and you don't see any of those guys, and so it's a bit of an annoying thing. And people say, well, I can't believe you have so and so here because he's supposed to. Everybody says he's here, and I'm like, who's everybody? I mean, I talk to NFL teams, and we scout, and we got a pretty good track record. So I don't really care what some guy on Twitter says. So anyhow, that's the end of that rant. Guys that fell, I appreciate you listening to me on that one.
No. Hey, listen. I 100% agree with you. That's why I just said I don't claim to be a draft expert. I don't know all these names, but that's why I get the people on that do, and that's yourself. And that's why I like listening to what you say, and you guys do hit on things. And I make sure to go back after the draft with your ranking list and say, listen, exactly where these guys were is what they were saying, or pretty close to. So, I trust what you're saying. Not a problem on this end of things. And if anybody takes offense to that, that's on them. I mean, go to the rinks, travel around, and do the work.
And you know what? Just my last point on this is that's why I've got such respect for Bob McKenzie, because Bob doesn't pretend to be a scout. Bob doesn't say I'm in the rinks and I'm scouting these guys. He comes right out and says I talk to head scouts for teams, and I says where I get my rankings, and he's open about it and he's honest about it. And his rankings by far are the best. They're the most true to where guys get drafted. They're maybe not true to what we look back in 5 years because those guys are telling him the truth. So I got all the time in the world for Bob and his rankings. As I said, I haven't seen him yet. I'll look after we get off here. But yeah, like guys like that don't pretend to be scouting. They're consensus guys. That's perfect for me. So back to your question of guys that falling. Yeah, Brad Lambert's got to be the guy. I mean, I like Brad Lambert to a certain extent, but you're right. I mean, a year ago, 18 months ago, he was a top 5, guy people talked was a top 5 pick. And, he's really fallen. We've got him at 20. We got him at 20, which, I think is low based on what he could become, but there's a big bust factor with him. And, he really struggled at times. I mean, the World Juniors, they only played a couple games. And when he played in the World Juniors, he was phenomenal. And everybody said, well, Jesus, how is he not in the top 10? because we watched the rest of the year too. So he's probably the one that, I think most people. Ivan Miroshchenko, obviously, he's a Russian kid that got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Has got treatment for it, so he didn't get to finish the year. Everybody says his treatment has gone well. He's back to training again. He's a guy we'll talk about with a potential Leaf pick, but he would have been a top 5 pick too. And I think the Russian factor with the war and his illness is scared people, but people shouldn't be. I mean, this kid is the same player, the same skill set, the same upside as he had before he got sick and before the war. So those are probably the two that I think have probably fallen the most, but both certainly still have high upside.
No, definitely. Well, I'm a Mike Hogg and Mark, that. So I'm gonna let Dylan ask a question here before I keep rambling on. Go ahead, buddy. Throw one out there.
Outside of the first round, who is somebody that you look at that could impact the NHL in a couple of years and be a superstar?
We've got him right at the bottom of the first round. Maverick Lamoureux is a defenseman in Drummondville. He's 6'7". I think he's got more skill. Even guys on our staff, we argue a bit about it because they think I'm a little too bullish on him. I think he's a big, strong kid. We've seen what some of these guys have done. You see what Nicky Hague has done in Vegas and stuff. I think he's a guy that we've got him at 32, which is obviously right at the bottom of the first round. But I don't think he goes in the first. But we may look back in a few years and say, this kid fell into the second and is a real treat. I mean, at that size, and I think he's got some skill. He's definitely got some nasty to his game, which, again, teams always like. He's got a huge wingspan on him. So he's probably one of the guys that I think could, probably aren't a Thursday night draft pick, but we'll go early on Friday, and I think has a chance to, when we look back, to say, yep, we kind of missed on him.
All right. Yeah, Dylan, keep going, man. I know you got questions over there, man. Come ask some questions.
I know there are a lot of teams that have multiple picks in this first round, but overall draft, who do you think is going to have the best draft?
That's a real tough question. I mean, it's I'll be honest with you, Dylan. I couldn't tell you of who's got what picks. I mean, I know the Leafs. I did 10 minutes of research before I come on with you guys. Yeah. Obviously, I know what their picks are, but I don't know. I always go with who the best scouting staffs are. I mean, it's no secret why Tampa's been to 3 straight cups. Al Murray's one of the best in the business. I think I always look for them. And again, they've hardly have any picks in this draft. I know it sounds like a homer idea, but I'm a big fan of the Leafs scouting staff. I think you look at what they've done with what Kyle's given them in terms of having to trade some of those picks away. I think they've done a really, really good job. I'm also a big fan of Ottawa, Trent Mann, his staff, small staff. But, you look at some of the guys they've taken. When they took Sanderson, everybody went nuts and said it was a terrible pick. And wait till Jake Sanderson comes in this league and see what he's become, and Shabbat and those guys. So, I look at those teams that really have staffs that have really done well. But you never know. I mean, you can never tell, who ends up. It depends where guys pick. I mean, a lot of this business, and fans don't get this, but a lot of this business sometimes is luck. Sometimes there's a guy you want to take and you're bound, and 2 picks ahead of you, he gets taken. So you end up taking the next guy, and the next guy turns into a star, and everybody says, "Oh, you were so smart." Well, we wouldn't have been so smart if somebody hadn't taken a guy 2 picks ahead of us. You know what I mean? So there is a certain element of luck to it, but you look over the track record. Al Murray, to me, is the best in the business at it, and I think I think the Leafs and certainly Trent Mann are right there with them.
Awesome, thank you.
Well, another one for me. I want to say this: name a player right now, Mark, that nobody is talking about, that you guys are talking about, and that everybody that is in the know is talking about, that we should focus on. Who's this guy?
It's a good question. I think if I had to pick one, I would say Hunter Height. Plays in Barrie. Was phenomenal last year at the under-18 camp out west. Everybody was, blown away by how good he was out there. Went into Barrie this year, and again, like all the OHL guys, taking a year off because of COVID. Struggled in the first half, really came on in the second, and I think he's one of those guys that when I talk to so many scouts, and he's one of those guys that people always kind of quietly go, "Hey, what do you think of Height?" And you just know over the years of doing this that they're kind of hoping he falls. But when you've got 10 or 13 teams talking, saying the same thing, you're like, he's not going to fall. And I tell teams, I think guys think he's going to fall. Do I think he's a first rounder? I don't think so. I won't be shocked if he gets taken there. And I think you'll see a lot of people saying, "Oh, it was a reach pick," but there's a lot of teams that love the kid. that hope he falls, hope he falls late second, maybe even third. I just don't see it. And he's a guy that he started out as he was known in his minor midget years as a purely offensive guy. Was, like I said, phenomenal to every team. The first half just didn't generate a lot, didn't do a lot. But the second half, he developed his game, became much more physical, got into the dirty areas, and he's one of those guys, like I said, the teams, everybody asks quietly about. They don't want to, they don't want to tip their hands and say, we love this guy. But they always say, hey, what have you heard of height? Does anybody like height? And you just, again, having done this so long, he's one of those guys you just know is going to go higher than people think.
No, well, that's I look so far on 4 of the 5 draft lists I've seen. He is in the 3rd round on 4 of them, 2nd round on 1 of them. Yeah. So obviously, from what you're saying, everybody's or all of these rankings, so to speak, are leaning towards he's going to be a later draft pick. But maybe after this clip, and obviously with your sway, he may barge his way into that 1st round with teams not wanting to miss out on him. And let's talk about, hey, if you're a fan of any other team, you might want to tune out for the next portion. We're going to be talking about the Maple Leafs here. I want to ask, the Leafs obviously have that 1st round pick. It's towards the later of the round. You talked about the Russian kid maybe being able to fall into their lap. Would it be wise? We talked about Kyle Dubas and what he does to get his scouting staff the most capital for a draft. Would it be wise maybe to stretch that pick and make it 2 second rounders or a 2nd and a 3rd or whatever he does to fill the draft cupboards here, where if a height does end up going in the 3rd round, maybe you can juggle some things around and get some guys you really want that other teams may be talking about but may not get to until later, but it'll give you an opportunity. What do you think the smart play here is for the Maple Leafs?
Well, I think it's one of those things that'll if that decision is made, and we all know Kyle's history of trading down to try to accumulate picks, that'll be made right before the pick, I think. He'll talk to some teams, but they'll have a list probably, I would say, of 3 or 4 guys that they really want there. And if those 3 or 4 guys are gone, maybe it's 5 or 6. I don't know exactly how many, but they'll have a list of guys they like. And if those guys are all gone and he has a chance to move down, he'll do it in a second. Yeah. I also don't think, and in his history, he hasn't done it yet, but I don't think it's unheard of for him to move up either. There's some guys in this draft, and I get asked all the time, who are the Leafs going to take? And I said, well, if you tell me who the first 26 guys are, I'll tell you who the 27th is going to be. But, you have to look at their history. Kyle's made it known back when he was in the Ontario Hockey League and obviously now in the National League, he thinks skill is the hardest thing to acquire. And so he's going to use that pick. I mean, size be damned, they get criticized and everything like that, but that's his philosophy. And you can say what you want, but that franchise is in good shape. So, I mean, if a Frankie Nazar falls, for example, undersized, but tremendously skilled, and like I said, Clayton Keller, if he starts falling, I could see Kyle maybe saying, let's jump up with him. Jagger Firkus is a kid I just talked about who really came on in the second half, real skill offensive guy.
Yeah.
Brad Lambert, Brad Lambert, we can say what we want, and there's a lot of criticism of him, a potential bust, but maybe one of the best skaters in the draft, can make plays. Again, does that sound like something Kyle likes? Absolutely.
Yes.
On the back end, Denton Matichuk's a kid that there's all kinds of, again, I talk to teams and teams are all over with this guy. Some teams love him. Some guys are not so sure. They're afraid he's going to be a bit of a mess defensively. Highly skilled, makes plays, quarterback a power play. Again, all stuff we've seen that Kyle likes and in his guys. So, I think they'll have a list. I wouldn't be shocked. I have no idea. Incidentally, they might be the tightest team in terms of getting information out of anybody. I mean, Kyle learned from Lou Lamoriello. I'll tell you, Lou's always the best. You'll never hear anything about them, but Kyle learned from them. I mean, you can't get anything out of them. I have no clue. So they do a real good job of locking down who they like, and that's obviously the way to do it. But some teams are a little more open and willing to share info, not the Leafs. So, I think you got to look at sort of size be damned. Miromashenko is another guy. Like I said,
I was going to say, yeah.
If he starts to fall, there's been a little bit of question of his character. I don't really buy it. One of my guys over there sort of is a friend of the family kind of thing. And it just says he's kind of a quiet, he's not a bad kid. So, everything mixed into it. I don't see him falling real far because teams, if you're picking at 10, 11, 13, something like that, you got a guy that could be the top. No, I mean, I think he started the year for us at 2. Wright was 1. I think he was 2. based on how he'd been. So, a team like that, I don't see him falling real far. But again, that's a guy that could fall to a certain extent where Kyle says, hey, let's jump up 7 spots here to 15 or, 20 or something if he's there, and let's go get him. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for Kyle to trade up this year. But like I said, they'll see who's falling, who they like. And then if they don't like who's there at 27, for sure, he'll trade down.
There's one thing that did happen that everybody kind of got excited about was Kyle Dubas did like one of Brad Lambert's tweets. Obviously, anytime an NHL GM or anybody connected to a team in a position of power does that, people start trying to draw the dots and make the pattern fit to what they want to say. I'm not saying that's where he's going to go, but maybe they feel with what they have on their staff that they can bring him around. I wouldn't be upset if they selected the Russian guy either. I can't say his name. I'm not going to try. I always mess those up. I butcher them so bad. So, but the only question I have to ask about Russian players, and not getting political here, but I just want to know, are teams having cold feet about doing it, giving the political climate there, or is it still, hey, the best player at this spot is the best player at this spot?
Well, publicly, they're going to say all the right things. But teams have to get the best players. And I'll give you one name, Logan Mailloux.
Yeah. Okay.
Everybody publicly said there's no chance. I didn't even think he was going to be a draft. That's how wrong I was on it. I just thought that the public relations hit was too much. Lo and behold, what do we get? He's a first rounder. So, teams can say what they want, and they certainly have to, play the political game and say the right things. And they believe some of that stuff too. But at the end of the day, what does a 17-year-old kid playing in
exactly.
What does that have to do with the war? I mean, maybe he opposes the war. You don't know that. And, conversely, they say, Mintikov, the defenseman Saginaw, he's playing over here. He's okay. Well, he's still Russian, but you know what I mean? And I think he should be okay. But I have a bit of a problem with really holding it against those kids. Now, if they've come out publicly and said, listen, I'm fully in favor of the war and I hope we crush Ukraine, that changes things. But listen, Logan Mailloux had some of the worst accusations against him. And it didn't stop Montreal from taking him in the first round. And so at the end of the day, teams can say what they want, but scouts and head scouts and GMs know we've got to get good players here.
No, definitely. And like you said, 17-year-old kid, man, he's not impacting any of that stuff, and he's not coming out waving a flag either which way. He just wants to play hockey. So select the best player available. That's what you got to do. Another name connected to the Toronto Maple Leafs is Rutgerd, and I'm not going to say his last name because I'll butcher it again. But that's one I keep seeing every pundit that can write an article linking the Leafs to, just because that's where their pick falls around, and that's where a lot of these lists seem to list him. Do you see him being a fit for the Maple Leafs? What do you think of him? Obviously, a lot of people saying this is where the Leafs may go. That's why it led me to ask if the Leafs are just going to end up trading that for a couple of picks, because I don't know. I don't get excited about the name, but maybe I'm wrong.
The quick answer is no, I don't see a fit there. Partly because Rutger McGroarty's biggest issue is his foot speed. He's a big, strong guy, scores goals, kind of Tyler Toffoli-like. I guess if you want to go one step further into this, the Sioux Greyhounds did draft Rutger McGroarty. Now, he's not going to show up in the Sioux, and we know Kyle and the Sioux relationship, so maybe that would be part of it, but I just don't see it. They want to play fast. They want to play skilled. And Rutger's a really good player. Don't get me wrong. He's a big, strong power forward. He's going to score goals, but he doesn't play fast. His foot speed is the one issue that concerns me. And again, for the type of player he's going to be, he'll be fine with it. But again, all I can do is go by what Kyle's done in the past. I mean, maybe they decide they want. I mean, maybe they decide they want to get bigger and stronger, and foot speed isn't as important. But you've got to go on past. And like I said, he's looking for the most talented kid he can get at that spot. So I don't know. Again, if there's groups saying that Rutger McGroarty's going there, you can bet guarantee in the next week you'll see it another 100 times because everybody else will copy it too. But I just don't see a fit. And if I'm wrong, I'll be happy to come back on and tell you I was dead wrong. But it just doesn't fit with the type of player that they usually go after and want to get. So I just don't see it happen.
Yeah, usually when there's names connected to the Leafs, I do a little bit of digging just to see what the player's like. And that's why I said I didn't see it. I didn't feel it was. But I wanted to get your thought on it because maybe I'm dead wrong. Like I said, I don't do this for a living. I don't know anything, and I don't claim to. I just see what I see on clips and see what I read in articles. So that's what I read in articles, and that's what I saw in clips. So I know it's not exactly his forte. But what is his forte? Dylan, what do you got? get a question over there? What's going on?
Now it's nothing to do with the Leafs, but with the Memorial Cup coming to an end, were there any players that stood out to you that helped their draft rankings?
Not really. There weren't really any high end draft guys at the Memorial Cup, really. I mean, a guy like Logan Morrison, who's been phenomenal right through the playoffs. Again, he's a 19-year-old kid. I watch some of the telecasts and I see Craig Button saying he's guaranteed to be drafted. I'm not so sure. I mean, he's played very well and certainly teams would like him. So I think a guy like that's helped himself. There's been some guys that have played well, but in terms of impacting the draft, I haven't seen a lot that really is going to change a ton about anything. Jordan Donovan is a Hamilton defenseman, but if you watch the games, you might not even know because he just doesn't play a lot. Sean Donovan's kid,
Right.
former NHLer,
Yep.
but he hasn't gone up or down based on the Memorial Cup. So it's really a bunch of 4 old teams, quite frankly, that are competing, and that's generally who wins the Memorial Cup. So it's not a shock. Sometimes we get lucky and there's a lot of draft eligibles. This year we just aren't, and that's why I'm not out in New Brunswick right now and didn't go because it just frankly wasn't worth it. So I don't see anybody really jumping up. There's some older guys that have really kind of helped themselves, and if they don't get drafted, they'll get themselves a contract.
There you go. Got another one to bang off there, Dylan, or what?
Nope. I think I'm good.
All right. Well, I want to ask this one to Mark. Obviously, fans love the theatrics of trades at the draft. With there being so much fluidity through the top 10, probably at least maybe even the top 20, 25, do you see a lot of trades? What's your over-under on trades? Seeming everything is now a betting site. What would you say for trades going into the draft? Are we going to get a bunch? Are we going to get a couple? I think we're going to at least get 5.
Yeah, I think we will too. I think there will be some trades. I think because this year is so varied. Again, there's guys I talk to who've got guys in the 4th round, and other teams have them in the 1st round. So you've got such a wide variance of opinions on some players that if you've got a guy, if a team has a guy at 9 on their list and he's sitting there at 21, and you got to trade up and give up whatever your spot is in a 2nd or 3rd, like guys will do that. I think so. It's not like there's a consensus kind of 15. The 15 are going to go in order, and you kind of know if you want to get one of those 15, you got to trade up, but they want the guy at 14 anyway, so they're not going to trade. So I do see some trades, certainly. And some of these guys are going to fall. I always laugh. I talk to agents a lot too, and according to the agents, there's 25 guys going to the top 10. And I'm not a real math. I'm pretty sure only 10 can go in the top 10, but everybody thinks this guy's, and so a guy that is like everybody thinks the top 10 pick is still sitting there at 16. We talked about the Leafs, maybe Miroshenko or Nazar. They would certainly be interested in that kind of stuff, I would think, and so would a bunch of other teams. So I do see a lot of trades. I don't know if we're going to see a lot of players. I think those have gone kind of by the wayside. A lot of player for pick. Certainly I think the Chychrun thing is interesting with Arizona. See if Billy Armstrong does something there and moves them. But they've got so many picks anyways that, for them, it's going to have to get players back. So I see trades. I just don't see a lot of players flipping sides.
All right. The last one I'll leave you with here, obviously Leafs fans need a little bit of hope, a little something to cling on to. So I'm going to throw some names that Leaf fans love to talk about here that are in the draft cupboards right now. And I want to get your opinion on 3 guys. We'll start, and they're going to be, I think, playing in the World Juniors. They're all back in it. First, I'll start with Ronnie Hervenin. What do you think of him? What is his NHL chances? Is he a guy that can make any kind of impact for the Maple Leafs in the next couple of years?
Yes, he's going to play in the National League. He's going to be a good player for them. I don't think he's a star, but he's still probably a couple years away at least. I think he's got to play probably a year or 2 in the American League. But I'm a Ronnie Hervenin fan, and I think the other things he brings, the character, the leadership, the kind of way he conducts himself will fit in perfectly. And he's one of those guys that we always say in the scouting world isn't the puzzle, but he's a key piece of that puzzle, and he may end up filling a lesser role than I think people think maybe right now. But you need those guys to have a deep lineup, and I think he will be one of those guys.
What would you place a comparable for him at? A comparable player?
Oh, I hate comparables. I got to be honest with you, boys.
I know you do.
I'm trying to do comparables. We have a contract with the team to top 50 guys and do comparables for them. And I'm telling you, I spend an hour doing comparables. So I honest to God, I'm terrible at it. I really am. I'm not even kidding you. We'll look at a guy in the top 15 and I know the kid cold. I can tell you everything about him in an NHL comparable. And I'm just like, because I think of an NHL guy and there's nothing ever matches up. And I think, well, that guy plays hard. This guy doesn't play hard. So that's not fair. So I don't know. I honest to God, we've been doing this a while. I am terrible at player comparisons, boys. I'm not going to lie to you.
No worries. All right, we'll flip to the next player. Topi Nemela. A lot of people are very high on this guy, obviously for his skill, what he can bring on the back end. Are Leafs fans right to be excited about him, and how far away would he be from playing in the NHL if he makes it at all?
Again, another player like I think is, I talked earlier about what the Leafs have done with their drafts. Like you look at where they took him. He's a 3rd round pick, and I think this is a guy that is going to be. I think he's going to be more impactful than Ronnie Hervenin, and as a 3rd round pick, that's gold right there. I mean, another kid I think is going to, Leaf fans watching World Juniors are going to get very, very excited watching those two guys. I mean, I think they did at Christmas. But I think even 6 or 8 months later, whatever it's going to be, they're going to be more excited because I think both those guys are going to be standouts there. Certainly we saw what Niemela did last year at the World Juniors. I think, again, I'm a big fan of both those guys. I assumed you were probably going to mention those two guys because they're the ones that fans talk about. But, like I said, and I'm not kissing the Toronto Maple Leafs ass. But when you get a 3rd round pick like Topi Niemela, as much as, I've got friends in every organization, you've got to tip your hat to them, and that's a hell of a pick, and I think is going to be a key part. I mean, he's not going to be a 25-minute-a-night guy, but he's going to be a 16-minute-a-night guy that's going to play and make plays and do things for them that's going to help them.
No, that's something we need. Before I ask you about the last guy, and you probably know who that's going to be as well, what is one guy in the Leafs farm system that has been drafted that nobody really talks about that you're like, watch out for this guy? We talked about Hervenin and Nemela. Obviously, we're going to move on to the guy that everybody's been talking about lately. But is there somebody in there that maybe we should be paying more attention to that we're not?
I think, and it's kind of a weird answer, but I think people have sort of forgotten about Rodion Amirov. This is an unbelievable player. He got sick. There's no doubt about it, and he's got a battle back from that, and I think he will. But he's one of those guys that they took. Everybody's excited for a little while, but then he kind of just disappears, and then he's been sick. So now people are like, "Wow, maybe he's not ever going to play, or his career's over." And this kid's a dynamic player, and one of the knocks, I guess, the times on the Leafs is, did they play hard enough? This kid plays hard. I mean, this kid is skilled and he plays hard. And it's funny for a top, I don't know, where did he go, 10, I think overall, or wherever he went.
15, I think that year.
15 is, but for a guy to go there and for like to say, well, he's kind of an unknown prospect, but he really is. He's a guy that, again, I don't do a lot of stuff, but I'm sure if you look down a top prospect for Leafs, kind of, if he's on that list, he's down a list. And I don't think he should. This is a guy that should be a top 6 guy for them, assuming his health comes back, and I think it will. He's going to battle through it. This is a kid that I interviewed before the draft and was blown away through the translator about, just the way he answered questions, the way he wanted the challenge of stuff. And your heart goes out to him, obviously being sick and stuff, and he's got a battle for sure. But I just have a feeling this kid he'll find a way to battle through it, no problem. And he's going to be a top 6 guy for the Leafs in a few years. And people are going to go, oh yeah, we forgot about Rodion Amirov. He's, he'll come over and maybe play for the Marlies one year and light it up. And people are going to go, oh yeah, we took him in the 1st round. That's right. When everybody's talking about the Ronnie Hervenins of the world.
Well, listen, everybody's going to be the best draft guy because they're like, yeah, I know, I told you Amirov was great. When he was drafted, I remember everybody saying, who is this guy? And why did they take him? The big fish in the pond is obviously Matthew Nice. The Leafs went to him before the playoffs and said, hey, why don't you come on down and play with us? Join the team. Come for the run. Come for the stretch drive. Get involved. He didn't, obviously. Do you, A, see him joining the Maple Leafs at the end of this season coming up? And B, what do the Leafs have in this guy?
Well, yeah, I do. I think he's going to play this year. And at the end of this year, much like a Jake Sanderson did in Ottawa, he's going to play this year. And at the end of the year, he'll sign and probably join them, join for, a playoff run. Let's face it, they're going to, obviously they're going to be in playoffs next year. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And join them. But you're talking a power forward that's really come out of nowhere. Very fleet, big, strong kid. just lit the NCAA up this year. And you just don't do that as a freshman. I mean, anybody that watches that stuff at all, you're 24, 25-year-old men out there. And when you get a young kid that comes in and dominates the way Matthew Nyes did, there's a reason at the deadline where, every time somebody called Kyle about a player, the first guy they mentioned was Matthew Nyes. I mean, everybody talked, and I'm a huge Nick Robertson fan, as you remember. There was a time when everybody thought Nick Robertson was the best prospect they had, and that's who everybody wanted. I certainly wasn't on those calls, and Kyle's never saying to me, obviously, but Matthew Nyes, I know, is highly coveted around the league, and everybody thought, maybe we can get Kyle to kind of give up on him. There was a team I know that was putting out that he's never going to sign with the Leafs. He's just going to ride out his 4 years, a la an Adam Fox, and then become a free agent. I don't think so. I've talked to the agent. This is a guy that wants to play another year of the NCAA, feels he owes it to the school. And is patient. He knows he's coming to the National Hockey League, so there's no rush to it. And so I don't see any part of them worrying about it. I don't think Kyle's worried about it at all. He certainly flew in to meet with them. From what I understand, very, very impressed with him. And the kid just said, I want to go back to school and nothing, I'm happy to be a Leaf. And I think that's what will happen. But you're talking about a big power forward that's a top 6 guy. You got James Van Riemsdyk behind you. I think, has a chance to be better than James Van Riemsdyk, and James had a pretty damn good career. So, we'll see. I mean, again, these are all kids, and he's still, but certainly from where, again, another pick that they took, not a first round pick that becomes a guy that everybody wants. That's why I say you got to tip your hat to their scouting staff, but he's a guy the fans should be excited about. And, it sounds like the 3 guys you mentioned, I'm high on all of them, but Matthew Nyes by far will be the most impactful guy of those 3 for sure.
Well, you just made both of us smile real big because we really need a little bit of light on Leafland right now, obviously going out in the first round again. So to know there's 3 bright prospects possibly coming. Well, 4, we're talking about Amirov too. So get him in there as well. Mark, I always want to thank you very much for taking the time to jump on the show. You always do. You always make time around the World Juniors. Obviously we have one coming up in August. Want to get you on again before that happens. But I got to ask the question. Are you going to be in Halifax for this year's World Juniors?
I will be in Halifax for this year's World Juniors. There will be a lot of stuff.
We are going to have to sit down face to face for a couple of wobbly pops and talk some hockey. It'll be an honor to meet you, my friend, down here.
Well, it's no honor, I'll tell you that much, but I'm looking forward to it. And just the last point on the Leafs, as you were talking, just popped in my head. I mean, there's only so many spots on a roster, but when you've got those 4 prospects you just mentioned, those are trade capital. And Kyle obviously this year decided that whatever they were offered for Matthew Nyes wasn't enough, but those are 4 guys that teams covet and are going to be able to use for trade capital as well. I mean, you can't have 25 guys on your roster. So again, that's what happens when you draft good. You develop these prospects you get in the 2nd, 3rd round and turn them into real, tradable pieces at the deadline if you have to. So yeah, I think that's the other part that Leafs fans should be excited about. I'm looking forward to it, guys. I'm Halifax, one of my favorite cities. Been out there so many
I just went, so it's a beautiful place to be.
Yes, and it can be fun. You can have the odd enjoyable time there, and I'm never opposed to having an enjoyable time for an evening. So, I for sure it's a date. I will once I get my schedule set up out there, I will certainly let you know when I'm coming out, and we will do that. We'll get together and have a few drinks and a few laughs and a few stories.
I would love to be a part of that for sure. Mark, as always, thank you very much for dropping by. This has been Offsides Draft Special with Mark Seidel. We have him on all the time. Proudly brought to you by our friends over at Boxing Rock Brewing Co. We'll get Mark a couple of these when he comes down. And you know what this is. It's Offside Hockey Talk, where hockey comes to talk.